November 2024, Interlagos, Sao Paulo. The rain is hammering down so hard the TV cameras can barely see the track. Max Verstappen starts 17th.
Sao Paulo Grand Prix is underway.
By the end of the first lap, he's already overtaken 6 cars, 3 of them at the Senna S chicane. The chicane literally named after the man everyone keeps comparing him to. Up and down the pit lane, team principals are watching the same thing and thinking the same thing. This looks like Senna at Donington. He's driving past everybody, like the other cars are not Formula 1 cars. 30 years separate these two men. One is gone, one is rewriting every record in the book. But the question nobody seems able to answer is this: what would Ayrton Senna actually think of Max Verstappen? To understand what Senna might think of Verstappen, you first have to understand what Senna thought about racing itself. Because for Ayrton Senna, driving a Formula 1 car was never just a sport. It was something closer to a religious experience.
A track record earned Senna his 50th career pole position.
During qualifying at Monaco in 1988, Senna put his McLaren on pole by 1.4 seconds over his own teammate, Alain Prost. Afterward, he described entering a kind of trance. He said he was no longer driving consciously, that the circuit became a tunnel, that he kept going deeper and deeper, finding speed that shouldn't have been there. That was who Senna was, a man who believed the limit was not a wall but a door, and that if you pushed hard enough, it would open.
He's waving already.
Prost was awarded victory.
And he distilled his entire racing philosophy into one sentence that still echoes through every paddock in the world: if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you are no longer a racing driver. That quote defined his career. It justified his aggression against Prost. It explained the Suzuka collisions of 1989 and 1990. And it divided Formula 1 into 2 camps that have never fully reconciled. You either believe the gap was sacred, or you believe Senna was reckless. He knew the contradiction himself. He once described the experience of being seen as the best and the fastest.
Senna goes off at the first corner, but what has happened to Prost? He has gone off too.
Somebody who could not be touched, while at the same time being enormously fragile. He didn't hide from that tension. He lived inside it. But here's where it gets interesting, because 30 years later, there is one driver who lives inside that exact same contradiction. And the people who knew Senna best are the ones who keep saying it. The Senna-Verstappen comparison didn't start on the internet. It started in the paddock, from the mouths of people who shared a garage with Senna, designed his cars, and raced wheel to wheel against him. Gerhard Berger was Senna's teammate at McLaren for 3 years. He saw the qualifying data. He felt the speed gap every single session. For 30 years after Senna's death, Berger maintained that Senna was the greatest driver who had ever lived. Nobody came close. Then in January 2024, Berger publicly changed his mind. He said he now believed Verstappen had surpassed Senna. His reasoning was simple. Senna still made mistakes occasionally. Verstappen, according to Berger, essentially does not. At the start, in the first corner, in wheel-to-wheel combat, he is always in the right position. That alone would be significant. But Martin Brundle, who raced against Senna in both Formula 3 and Formula 1, identified something beyond pure speed. He recognized the same psychological warfare, the same ability to live inside the heads of rival drivers, to make them second-guess themselves before the corner even arrived.
And secure the 1988 Drivers' Championship. It was a truly remarkable performance.
Brundle saw Senna do it for years, and he watched Verstappen doing the exact same thing, race after race, with the same deliberate intensity. Then there's Adrian Newey, the greatest car designer in the history of the sport, and the only man alive who built championship-winning machinery for both Senna and Verstappen. Across a career spanning 4 decades and dozens of world-class drivers, Newey names exactly 2 as standing above everyone else: Senna and Verstappen. Nobody else makes that list. Even Alain Prost, Senna's greatest rival, the man who collided with him at Suzuka and later carried his coffin, acknowledged the connection. Prost said the similarities are real, particularly in how both drivers approached the early, aggressive phase of their careers. However, Prost also saw something that separates them. He said Verstappen has found his own way of being, his own path, in his own style, and that observation from Prost might be the single most important thing anyone has said about this comparison. The parallels between Senna and Verstappen are almost eerie when you lay them side by side. Both are considered the greatest wet-weather drivers of their generation. Senna's opening lap at Donington in 1993, where he carved from 5th to 1st in 65 seconds through a monsoon, is still regarded as the greatest single lap in Formula 1 history.
And Senna into 2nd place already, and he's giving it absolutely everything in the wet part of the race.
Verstappen's charge from 17th to victory at Interlagos in 2024, in similar conditions, was immediately placed alongside it. Both drivers share the record of 8 consecutive pole positions. Verstappen matched it at Imola in 2024, on the very circuit where Senna died 30 years earlier. Verstappen acknowledged the weight of that moment quietly. He said it was special, and that in a way, it was a nice memory to him. Both have been accused of crossing the line with their aggression. Senna deliberately collided with Prost at Suzuka in 1990.
Wheel has come loose from the rim as well. The tyres come loose from the rim.
At close to 150 miles per hour. He later confessed to it. Verstappen's battles with Hamilton at Silverstone, Monza, and Saudi Arabia in 2021 carried the same intensity, the same refusal to concede an inch. However, what separates them runs deeper than any statistic or moment on track. Senna was a devout Catholic who believed his speed was a gift from God. He carried a crucifix in his cockpit. He described qualifying laps as transcendent, almost out-of-body experiences. Racing for Senna was communion with something beyond himself. Verstappen describes the same impossible car control, the same ability to find grip that the data says isn't there. But he frames it entirely through technical language. Simulation laps, data analysis, preparation. Where Senna looked upward, Verstappen looks at a screen. And then there is the difference that can never be measured. Senna raced in an era where the sport killed you. He watched Roland Ratzenberger die at Imola the day before his own death, on May 1st, 1994. Senna once told the FIA's chief medical officer, who begged him to retire, that there were certain things over which we have no control. He said he could not quit, he had to go on. Verstappen races in the safest era the sport has ever known. The halo device that saved Lewis Hamilton when Verstappen's car landed on his head at Monza in 2021 simply did not exist in Senna's world.
No, he's not. And there's Max Verstappen right behind Hamilton into the first chicane once again. It's wheel to wheel, Hamilton and Verstappen, and this time Verstappen and Hamilton have crashed out.
That is not a criticism of Verstappen. It is simply the truth of what separates their experiences at the most fundamental level. So, what would Ayrton Senna actually think of Max Verstappen? Based on everything Senna ever said about racing, about talent, about the gap, there is really only one honest answer. He would recognize him, not as a copy of himself, but as someone who carries the same fire, the same refusal to accept second place, the same willingness to put the car exactly where others would never dare, the same ability to find speed that nobody else can explain. Senna believed that before being a racing driver, you have to become a man first, and that without that, no amount of talent would ever get you to the top. By every measure, Verstappen has done both. But Senna would also see the differences. He would see a driver who found his edge through simulation rather than prayer, a world where the danger that sharpened his own focus no longer exists, and he would probably respect that, because Senna always respected anyone who gave absolutely everything they had. Prost may have said it best. Max has a lot in common with Ayrton, but today, he has his own way of being, and perhaps that is the highest compliment of all. Not that Verstappen is the next Senna, but that, like Senna before him, he is entirely, irreducibly himself. Senna and Verstappen, 30 years apart, and still chasing the same thing. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.